I'm the Associate Provost for Space Commercialization and Strategy at the University of Central Florida. I too had to flee the once great state of California. Karen, I feel for you there. Hold out as long as you can, but after my whole life there, I moved to Florida a couple months ago, just in time to experience a couple of hurricanes. But the hurricane's better than the legalized crime and just general insanity that goes on there. You can imagine being a Trump conservative, basically, who'd been appointed 3 times by the president and going back to work in a Southern California university. That's an exciting thing. I'm here to talk about the area of research context that I study, which is the space industry. 22 years ago, I decided that I was going to use the commercial space industry as a research context to just study entrepreneurship. And I remember going back to my colleagues at the University of California, Irvine, and saying, yeah, I'm studying space entrepreneurship, this new commercial space thing that's happening, and they just shook their heads. Now, you can't study entrepreneurship in the aerospace industry because it's all these big companies of the military-industrial complex, which are either the government or indistinguishable from the government. And I said, no, I've met this fellow named Elon, and you are going to hear from him. And I have spent since then trying to tell people that they needed to listen to this fellow, Elon. And then fast forward, I went to go do my PhD. It turned out that the fine lady that was going to be my PhD advisor at UC Irvine had to go to Rice University for a couple of years. And so my good friend Peter Navarro stepped up and said, you know what, I'll be your advisor. And so Peter and I not only worked on my PhD for 5 years, we then wrote a book called Death by China, where I warned, is Dave still here? I warned a lot of the things that Dave talked about there, and we made a documentary saying that outsourcing our entire manufacturing base to China was suicidal. And I included a whole chapter in that book on space at the time. Took Peter over to SpaceX to tour the factory there. But I got a lot of conservatives who decided that they didn't like Elon because they didn't like Joe Biden or President Obama's EV mandates or whatever. And that was really frustrating to me because I knew Elon enough to say, you're really, really wrong about this. This guy is 98% on your side. And when you come to spend a moment, drive one of his cars and then tell me about it. So I can tell you, my electric car goes 200 friggin' miles an hour. It goes 0 to 60 in 1.9 seconds. It pulls, I don't know how many Gs, but better than any car I've ever owned, and it's the safest vehicle on the road. And most importantly, Teslas consistently win in the highest content of American parts in any vehicle. They're the most American cars on the road because basically they're highly vertically integrated. They're not shipping in a lot of subcomponents from China. Now that said, Elon has been building cars in China. If you want to criticize him for that, please do. He was like the last person to go over there, and it's really important to note, though, that Elon actually owns the Tesla factories, theoretically, as much as you can own something in China, whereas the GM and Ford factories are all joint ventures with a Chinese state-owned company who owns the majority percentage. So Elon was smart enough to get a better deal. I still think he'll get screwed there, and I tried to talk to his people about that, but oh well. Okay, so here to talk about space. I have a new book, Red Moon Rising with Peter Navarro. I see some of you have picked up a copy from the back table. If you can see me, I'd love to autograph it for you and collect $20. Okay. Quote endorsement from our book. I'm really proud of the people that have lined up for us in this book. Our book, Death by China, turned out to be really, really influential. I got a lot of shit in academia for suggesting that free trade was a bad thing and that the Chinese were not our friends because there was nothing more popular at that time than bringing more and more Chinese students, professors into our institutions. But I also took that book and I walked the halls of Congress and handed them out, and I mailed 50 copies to influential people in the United States thinking somebody might get back to me. One person got back to us. Do you know who that was? Donald J. Trump, right, who then endorsed our movie. Peter ended up being his chief economic advisor during the 2016 election. I ended up serving on the presidential transition team in the NASA agency review team, not because I knew Peter, interestingly. In fact, Peter didn't know that, but because of my connections and credibility in the commercial space industry. So a lot of people think that space is really expensive because, gee, those rockets cost millions and millions of dollars, and they do. But this is the federal budget, the blue line, and if you removed NASA, canceled everything entirely, shut everything down, and didn't give them a penny, it would be the dotted line that you would be left with, okay? NASA doesn't cost you anything, just shut up about that, okay? When I came in 2016, it was 0.42% of the federal budget, and now despite some nominal increases in the budget, it is 0.3 something percent of the federal budget. You would never notice if it disappeared. NASA's budget, $25 billion. Fraud, waste, and abuse in Medicare each year, the amount we admit is being stolen by criminals is somewhere between $50 and $100 million. So just the theft in Medicare is 2 to 4 times bigger than the entire NASA budget. F-35 cost overrun, $180 million. So just not the planes, just the part that's more expensive than it's supposed to be is, 8 times the NASA budget. The good thing, though, the good news is we have a really interesting thing going on. Now, this is a chart that shows a bunch of rockets from around the world, and it shows the cost per kilogram on the left to send something to orbit, and the year on the right. And you can see, in general, most of this data is just a straight line. We weren't really changing a lot. There were some rockets down at the bottom, all these Long March rockets that are Chinese, and they were cheaper, right? Cheaper for a number of reasons, one of which is there's no safety concerns when you launch a Chinese rocket. Boosters just fall on villagers, and they've killed a bunch of people, something I could go on about. But down in the corner there, the lower right-hand corner, you see Falcon, Falcon Heavy, and Starship. That is Elon Musk changing the paradigm of the market. What you have now is a case where the product is getting better, the service is getting more reliable, the service is being delivered faster. When I sit on my dock in Melbourne, Florida now, there is a Falcon 9 taking off every couple of days. It's really cool to watch. And it's getting cheaper and cheaper. We are to the point now where we're going to see less than $1,000 per kilogram to orbit. And we are destroying the Chinese on price. The Chinese have actually complained about the Americans undermining their space launch program. They used to have a commercial space launch business. Now it's gone. In 2012, the United States had 0% of commercial space launches, meaning if Israeli satellite company or an Indonesian TV company wanted to launch something, nobody went to the United States. Today, Elon has captured about 70% of that market. That is a positive net trade flow back into the United States. This is also interesting. This chart shows space launches per year. So you can see back in the Apollo heyday at the end of the 60s and 70s, there were a lot of launches, almost 150 a year at some point. Most of them were red, Russia. Now you notice Russia is going downhill. Russia will not have a space program in 5 years, in my opinion, because bad management, putting in idiots who are Putin's henchmen to run the program and just not investing in it. And specifically, Putin decided that commercial space was a bad idea and hasn't allowed the Russians to take what was a really great brain trust in space and turn it into a commercial product. So they're dead. The United States is that expanding blue section. And China is about even as far as that goes, but being pushed up in the total number of launches by the US. So this is a domain where the US is winning. And I want to point something out here. If you go to the SpaceX factory in Hawthorne, California, where I spent a lot of time, you will see thousands of people doing real work, bending metal and making things. And that's been going on for years, and they make enough money to actually support a family. Now, back when I grew up in Southern California, that's what everybody did. You got out of high school, you went down to some company that's now owned by Boeing, whether that Rockwell, North American, McDonnell Douglas, or whatever, and they taught you to be a machinist, and you had a job for life, and everything was good. And if, that's just gone because those aerospace companies mostly moved out of California. Elon said, look at all of this brain power here, the education system and all these empty factories. I can manage it, and he does. So this is an industry where we're still making things and succeeding, so don't let anybody tell you you can't actually make things in the United States, because you can. And how did it happen? Why did it happen? Because there are laws that prevent this industry from being exported out of the country, and there are huge regulatory barriers preventing the importation of products because of our national security concerns. So anybody that tells you, oh, if you put up barriers, then the domestic industry is going to become inefficient and non-competitive and it won't work, it's not true. We have a proven test case. Okay, and look at this chart. This is the number of objects launched into space, my gosh, per year, all right? So we now have about 2,000 and something objects launched into space every year. Most of those from the United States, almost all of them, and almost all of those are Elon Musk launching Starlink satellites, which are providing internet connections everywhere in the world. Has anybody used Starlink? It's pretty amazing, right? I was in the Tuamotu archipelago in remote French Polynesia this summer on a boat, and you would not have known that I was in my office, or not in my office, if I was speaking to you on Skype or Teams or some non-Zoom technology. It's that amazing, right? The Ukrainians have used it as a tool basically to manage their command and control systems and provide communications in areas that Russia stopped. In the book, we cover the fact that the very first thing the Russians did when they were ready to invade Ukraine was hack America's Viasat satellite over that area to stop communications. But they couldn't get to Elon's system. Turns out Elon's system is better than the Russian military system, right? That said, Vice President Harris is in charge of a project to provide rural internet connectivity to the United States, and they spent $50-something billion and haven't connected anyone. But they did make one important decision. They made the decision at the FCC to not allow SpaceX to provide that service, even though, gee, they can provide it in the Ukraine. And they actually wrote in their determination that SpaceX hasn't demonstrated that they can provide rural internet connectivity. Works in the friggin' Tuamotus, it works in Ukraine, but you know, we can't trust it in North Dakota, apparently. Anyway, I could go on about that. Trump's space policy was defined by my co-author, Peter Navarro, and Bob Walker, former chair of the SciTech Committee in Congress, back in 2016, right before the election. I'm excited to say Bob Walker and I published an article in the same journal, Space News, in 2024, that I hope is going to talk about what we're going to do, and it has a lot to do with it in this book. I also published this article recently about Vice President Harris. The Vice President doesn't have much to do by law, right? They get sent off to funerals, and they basically hope that the President dies. In this case, the President's dead, but nobody's acknowledged it. But they do actually have one legal responsibility. They are, by public law, responsible for chairing the National Space Council, which is a committee of cabinet secretaries and agency officials that deal with space, including the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, secretaries of Defense, Transportation, Commerce, and the NASA administrator. And Harris has completely failed at this job, as I note. What I like about this is not only that I got to say Vice President Kamala Harris has failed her nation as America's space power. I also said whether you care about space exploration or not, Harris's record as chair of the Space Council offers a serious indictment of her leadership capabilities. So she's required every year to have a public meeting with the National Space Council, and she held 3 because that's how many you have to have legally. The last one was held Christmas week, 2023, hastily put together December 20th, 2023, because they realized they hadn't had one. So they jammed this thing together. There's all these cabinet secretaries sitting there in a big public room. She speaks for 8 minutes and walks out of the room and hands the gavel over to one of her assistants, right? It's just an utter embarrassment. I am pretty proud to say, though, look where this got published. The Washington Post. How do you get an attack on Harris into the Washington Post? I don't know. I did it. I'm pretty damn proud of that. Thank you. All right. So We used the context of China's rise here in this book as a threat to get your attention, but the good news is America has every advantage still in this industry. It's as though we went back in time, and looked at the, American car industry versus China in, say, 1990 or something. We have everything we need, and people are aware that China's trying to beat us, including Senator Bill Nelson, who is now the NASA administrator under Biden. Not a fan of Bill's politics, but as NASA administrator, he's been really clear about this. China intends to take over the moon, stop the U.S. from doing that. I think that's okay. I'm glad we have a competitor, because competitors make us better. Sputnik, 1957, nobody's here old enough for that, but it scared the hell out of Americans, right? It was just a little metal ball that went beep, beep, beep. It did nothing. It did no science. It did no spying. It had no function. It just went beep, beep, beep. 13 years later, we were standing on the moon, right? In a picture with Buzz Aldrin there that looks almost like modernity. We still look at that image and think that's technology, right? And I'm so excited, that image is what really inspired me about space when I was 6 years old, and because of the luck I've had in my life and the people that supported me, I'm friends with Buzz now, and that's pretty cool. Now, in 1974, we did Handshake in Space, detente with the Soviets. We were going to all work together. Everybody said, could you imagine the amazing things we'll accomplish if we work with the Russians in space? Well, 25 years after that, we were in the exact same orbit, 250 miles up, 51-degree inclination, and there was still a Soyuz docked to the start of the International Space Station. 22 years after that, we're still in the same orbit, still a Soyuz docked to the International Space Station. We haven't gone anywhere new in 50 years because cooperation sucks. Competition is good. Nobody wants to watch the Olympics where all the nations hold hands and cross the finish line at the same time. So I am glad that the Chinese have a proud national space program they're working on, and that we need to beat it. Now, we have committed publicly to returning to the moon. We cannot allow the Chinese to beat us there. We've got to maintain our superiority. We've got to realize that China is developing asymmetric systems, and Russia is dangerously desperate, in my opinion. There are asteroids that could strike our planet, which was mentioned earlier. A Carrington event, anybody know what that is? It's an electromagnetic storm for the sun that could basically shut all your technology down and return us to the Dark Ages. We opened the book talking about that possibility. It's the equivalent of a Chinese electromagnetic pulse weapon. Somebody mentioned that nuclear weapons can be used. I think there's a good chance that they would be used in an electromagnetic pulse attack, where you blow this thing up in space over a city, no radiation problems, doesn't even destroy the city. It just shuts down every electronic device in the city. Including every car, of course, with electronic ignition, et cetera. There are great things happening in space, including we could grow you a new liver if you drink too much at tonight's reception with your own stem cells in microgravity, and return that to you and implant it. And we don't have to sit around and wait for somebody to die or for a Falun Gong member to be executed so that the Chinese can sell you their liver. There's materials on the moon that we could extract, which are important, and there's some incredible medicines and energy sources. Read the book. So our policy recommendations are that we maintain space superiority at all times, that we accelerate the return to the moon. We cannot fail on that. We foster a cislunar economy, and we support commercial-led operations, including Elon's Mars vision. We will not beat the Chinese at communism. So a big government program isn't the solution. We've got to embrace our commercial sector and let folks like Jeff Bezos and Elon, who are willing to put private capital in that, do that and succeed at doing it. And we've got to create an environment where they do not get screwed by our international competitors and forced to basically play with them in order to stay in the market, which we've let happen in every other industry. Space Force. I'm really proud to have served on the transition team that recommended creating the Artemis program, restanding up the Space Council, and one of the people that advocated early on for the Space Force. One of the things I like about the Space Force is they have a new mission statement: secure our nation's interest in, from, and to space, which means they're not just there to provide cover for the terrestrial warfighter, which was the traditional war of Air Force Space Command. They're not just providing communications and GPS and air superiority. They are protecting our assets in space. One of the things I liked, I hosted this event in D.C. last year, and you look at General Hyatt's socks. He's got a little astronaut there with an American flag, and it says dibs. All right, so I got those too. All right, thank you. I just wanted to end with this quote that I'm really proud of. General Stephen Quast, I don't know if any of you have ever met him or heard him speak, a truly great American who's very, very quiet. He's not out here with the rest of us talking, but I was very proud of what he said. During the Trump administration, Autry and Navarro were influential in defining the most important and successful U.S. space agenda since the 1960s. They were informed, determined, and fearless. I can simply tell you that if President Trump is reelected again, you can count on people who are informed, determined, and fearless, doing the right thing for our country on the high frontier, and we need to make that happen. Go vote.